And people ask me how. Well, you're the reason why I'm dancing in the mirror, singing in the shower. Ah! Sorry, I wasn't expecting you there at all, sexy. Bam, 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 bam. It's Mr. Dancer and his magic mess. Bam, bam. Today, I'm going to be talking about how Marker and Renee got and understood the country of Africa, especially in their film Les Statements. Oui. Actually, what I'll be convincing you to watch today is the film Mossane, filmed in 1996. It belongs to a rare group of African female-directed films from the 80s to 90s. This was Safi Faye's, the director of this film, first fictional work. Mossane is a very observing but cautious study of small communities in Senegal. I think that caution is wonderfully done and also what makes this film unique. I'll explain why that is, and hopefully that will convince you to watch this movie. Mossane belongs to our main character. It's her name. She has just reached the age of marriage and is extremely beautiful. Men around the village start falling in love with her, which quickly becomes kind of a curse. First, her own brother falls in love with her, and she must undergo an intense ritual with him to break his bonds. A stammering man falls hard for her, which ends with him trying to take advantage of her. There's even two little boys who are completely head over heels for her too. Luckily, Mossane is in love though. She loves a poor university student who has come home because his school is on strike. Her beauty, unfortunately, causes one more problem for her. Her parents have promised her to a successful businessman in France since her birth. Now, he has just sent dowries back to have her. Her family refuses to hear her opinions and wants her to get married to this businessman. This forces Mossane to make decisions, which unfortunately results in a tragedy. And that tragedy is she marries me. She's mine, and I'm glad I crashed the wedding. Ethnography is the natural instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstances, mood, relationships with others. According to Carly Bay Jepsen, oh wait, sorry, that actually says emotion, my bad. Fortunately, this is a really big SAT word, I don't really know what it means. I believe this word is the study of cultures, basically. However, one big important factor of it is observation, and that ethnographers observe cultures and people in order to study them. This is why when I look outside the window, Tafaris is there. They're studying me. As a filmmaker, Safi Faye came from an ethnography background, and many of her older films embraced a cinema verite observational documentary style. What I think is very interesting is that I think Faye personally invites all her viewers to join her in an ethnographic study, but with caution. If you feel like you belong to a culture, you should understand this. When you invite a foreign study to come and look at your own, they will always interpret it and change the representation completely. Faye is completely aware of the dangers, but invites you anyway, using as many techniques as she can to steer you away from making blanket interpretations and treating them as representation. For Faye, the question becomes, what is the media's role in a healthy or toxic side of ethnography? And what do you do with the result? When you realize the media will always provide positives and negatives, you know what you do? You struggle. I actually didn't know Faye was an ethnographer before I saw this film, yet I still caught a lot of these push and pull techniques that I'm about to talk about, which is why I think this is an intentional invite, because she tries to make it as clear as possible. Simply put, one of the easiest ways she does this is by actually making this a fictional work. Stylistically, the film retains that slow burn, natural dialogue heavy style that is common in most cinema verite films. Of course, slow is always important because I love slug girls too.
そして人が近寄ると殻が悲しそうな目でこちらをじっと見つめるという。
Naturally, this means you receive the film in this observational study way. However, since you know it's fiction, you never can dive truly into it and actually treat it like real representation. Also, Mossane's play on the theme intrusion is actually very fun. There's a few layers of intrusion that happens in this film. One of my favorite symbols is the way private spaces without doors are handled. Since there are no doors, most of these spaces can actually look like windows. A window is a reflection on the observational style of the film. At the same time though, these doors are intrusive. People can have private conversations and even sex and can easily get interrupted. Well, I guess unless you got a nice friend like this. And ethnography is the same way. No matter how hard it tries to be just observative, it will always be intrusive. The best case for an invitation though is in this scene. Media is also their window to the outside world too. An obscured glimpse that bears no real representation, but you have to use it. Now that I've completely read Safi Faye's mind perfectly without any mistakes, yare. So what are we observing here? Mossane transports you into a world of people who wear different clothes and live in different houses. They have no roads and they kick soccer balls that are a little flat. It's a world where thiep is a national dish. Actually, transport is completely the wrong word. You're not a part of this world, and the film does a lot to give that distance. It doesn't try to immerse you. Instead, Mossane moves from one scene to another as an observation of a small community. You get an insight into how small communities can work. You meet a bunch of characters who don't explain who they are or always share what they think. Yet you know all the characters in the film know each other very well, despite the fact they sometimes hurt one another. Small events turn out to be great gatherings that everyone can join, and characters visit one another whenever they feel like it. There are many events people do together. I also do that, by the way, as I have a bunch of friends. All my friends and me are always watching The Man Who Sleeps Together.
朝ですよ。起きてください。ねえ、起きてってば。おはよう。
If you're remote from Mossane's culture, like me, one of the biggest cultural shifts you'll experience is probably how mysticism, or better yet spirituality in this film, works. For a lot of the characters, spirituality isn't separate from everyday life. It is life. This is definitely different from media in different cultures. Take a look at something like Buffy or Nanoha, two different sides of the world, but both of them treat magic basically the same way. The central tension for both shows is focused on balancing the two different types of worlds. Mysticism isn't exactly magic, but that media attention to that sort of balance of between two worlds actually feels absent in this film, which is pretty crazy. Visually, these scenes are the most interesting part of the film. There's a ritual that asks us for water that requires milk, rice, and millet. Their hospital looks like any normie hospital in any normie medical TV show.
Hello, sick people and their loved ones. In the interest of saving time and avoiding a lot of boring chit-chat later, I'm Dr. Gregory House.
Then there's that ritual to separate that terrible incestual relationship.
私が春を好きなことも春が私を好きなこともそんな変なことなの？そんな気持ちすら持っちゃいけないの？兄弟だから家族だから誰か知らない人が決めたことだから。
In order to break their incestual bonds, Mossane is tied up to her brother, and then poured with some chicken blood. They have to stay together overnight next to some fire.
looy ragal maa ngi nii xool ma.
bëgg naa xool sama bëti càmmiñ ba mu gumba.
All these scenes breathe a lot of life into Mossane. For a film about tight-knit small communities, I'm actually pretty surprised how lonely this film feels. Now don't get me wrong, there is community energy, especially in the dancing, marriage ceremonies, and soccer practices. And yet, while everyone is always together and personal space is a little less defined, it still feels like an incredibly lonely film. The best way to understand what I'm talking about is by listening. The background in this film just tends to be extremely quiet. What you first see in this scene is a football game, which is a noisy event. Yet, the film pans towards a conversation, and the football game completely disappears sound-wise. The fact that such a large community event can completely go silent despite it happening in the background is pretty weird. And this is how the film creates loneliness, even though the characters are always situated around people. Background noise exists in this film, but the degree of it doesn't really always reflect the close-knit community the characters are in. In Mossane, it isn't uncommon to have quiet backgrounds, while the main focal source is very loud. Characters don't talk unless it's their turn. Movement outside the focus is very limited. It's similar visually too. Environmentally, the film is pretty barren. A lot of the community scenes are juxtaposed with very singular scenes, and many times these characters find themselves alone. I find this play on loneliness a very clever control of atmosphere. This iconic scene that gets used as the poster is a great example.
Susi, bañ naa la bis ni ki tey amuloo benn njëriñ. Bangal, samay maam, wéet naa fii si àdduna.
Now, while I do believe the film invites you to observe, it's pretty clear the film does not just invite anyone to make judgments. I think Faye makes obvious statements to invite us to question ethnography's positivity and toxicity, but there is no clear invite to discuss the actual case studies themselves. Those discussions are likely reserved for people who do have context, so I'm definitely not the best person to discuss this with. I did read a pretty interesting article, and I'm going to link that below. It gives a lot more context on some of the cultural artifacts that are in this film that I have no understanding about. It gives more context on the type of mysticism that actually happens, imperialism that happens in this film too, and also sex, gender, sexuality. Mossane is actually surprisingly sexual for its time.
Daaw daal saa yu jógee tool ya ba sonn lool ba ma weddoo sama bécco ba romb ko dootul ànd ak toog sagoom waxuma laa nag suñ demee ci néeg ba foo toll dangay dégg riir mi mel ni tama bu ñu ëwee dëru bay.
And also the symbol of water and showers, which I don't entirely understand why, but hey, there are at least a ton of naked bodies now. I will leak that the water has something to do with the final tragedy. All these themes are grounded in traditions that I don't really have enough context to comment on. Once again, I hope you are more interested in checking this film out because of this review. Get your friends to watch this video if you enjoyed it, and let's build a funner film discussion circle around Mossane. Subscribe and like too if you enjoyed my review. With all that said, I'll see you all next time.
Yalla yalla lafal len cat te guddal sew fan.